system or be free hanging so that you could see both sides.
Yeah.
But to me, but I realized that, everybody's has a different,
I still think that's really interesting because the backs tell such a different story, whether it's like the perfect back or like it's all messed up, or the flipped one where like they've spent so much time. I was at a quilt show. Okay, so this is weird. So I was at a quilt guild show, quilt guild on the weekend, and this woman had made this huge, must have been king size, and one side was the Star Wars theme for her son. The other side was this pink and white fully pieced thing because her daughter-in-law liked purple. Like, it was the most insane, like the amount of work. It took her 5 years to make it. And it was crazy. It was so interesting. But that was what she did. She was like, well, my son likes Star Wars and my daughter-in-law likes purple. So I made this quilt for the both of them.
I love that moment at the Guild show and tell where somebody shows the quilt and then everybody kind of catches a glimpse of the back. They're like, oh, turn it over.
Right, exactly.
And everybody likes the back better.
Right, because it's the back tells a really interesting story,
Mm-hmm.
right? The backstory, right?
Maybe I'm just more obsessed with like imperfection. And that's more
like
interesting to me than perfection. So I think that's a personal bias, but also I just also think it's really interesting how people choose to show what they are, like the back is really perfect on a lot of quilts, others, and also how people label, I want to, a lot of times I take quilts that are contest quilts that haven't sold to show all the different ways of labeling and show that, people, it doesn't have to be this pretty inkjet printed or embroidered solution to do the job.
Right.
If this quilt got separated from its maker, we could we could reconnect those two.
Now, how many shows do you attend? How often is Quilt Alliance at all? There's a lot. How many quilt shows are there? There's a lot of quilt shows now, right?
We typically now we go to maybe 2 shows a year. Our model is changing. As I said, we're really transitioning from from all the collecting work that we've done to the education and outreach mode. But this year we will probably attend as a vendor or as an exhibitor at maybe 2.
And what's the other one? You'll do Houston again, I would imagine. Are you
right? Yeah, maybe just the one, because Quilt Con is the other one we typically do. But this year it's so far from us.
It is so far, but isn't Nashville next year, 2019? So we'll be there.
Yeah, we'll probably
get to Pasadena. That was too far for us.
Yeah, it's such a great show though, and and I would like to see us this year. We will be at the Maine Quilts.
Oh, interesting.
As a lecturer, I'm very excited about that because that's a big show. And we will be at the North Carolina Quilt Symposium. So there's some smaller shows that will be, working as a lecturer, and they're involved. But the bigger shows are, really, we feel like we have to be represented and be there because I wouldn't have met you.
Right.
There's so many people that come there as sort of, it is the sort of center of all.
We're doing Paducah for the first time. So
you are? Okay.
Yeah, with my team, I keep calling my quilting army. So we're interesting. Yeah, so we'll fan out and experience it. So
it's a very great show. It's different. It's so different. The 3 shows are very different. And then another one that we'll probably work with is the Original Sewing and Quilt Expo, which is in smaller cities.
Oh, interesting.
Great team with that show too. Very committed to documentation and stuff too. And it's not just quilts, but apparel too, and other types of sewing. But
super interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, tell me a little bit about your Scholars Program. What is your Scholars Program?
The Scholars Program is not really moved forward much, but it's something that we do want to rekindle. But it's the QSOS project is a really rich oral history project. As I said, it's like 1,000+ interviews that we feel are underused, and we'd like some help from the scholars who do make use of them or would make use of them if there were learning guides or curriculum guides or searching tips. So we've kind of been using that group. We've only had, a small group of people take advantage of it yet, but it's a way to get a perspective from a historian or an academic's
Very interesting.
world to see, okay, well, what could we do to make this better? And we've had informal conversations with past board members who've been incredibly helpful for things like, so when the original interviews were done, the location field was not like a drop down where it was a very set field of city, state, country kind of thing. It was like so-and-so's house near Chicago, Illinois. You know, it was more like a
Right.
thing, which I'm sure made sense at the time, but now it makes it difficult.
Makes it harder. Yeah.
And also the idea that the keywords were not, there's no indexing, so there's no consistent keywords, so it's not very easy to search in its current format. So I think what happened is we started with that first group of scholars and we got so much input and then sort of said, okay, well, we really need to put our, put more time into the transition to the next usable format of this collection so that it's really.
All right, so I have a couple of ideas. So so first of all, I would love to be one of your scholars at some point because I think that'd be super great. Also, I think it would be so awesome to take some of the oral histories you have and put them on our podcast. So have like one that we take them and say, from the Quilt Alliance, this is, you know, going back to 1989, and here's something from that. I think it'd be so great because we already have it set up and we're broadcasting a whole bunch of stuff, and then we could have someone sort of talk about the, you know, like I could talk about it, or Pam Weeks is part of our project, who I adore.
Cool.
She's so great. And a few others that are really cool. And but just like contacts, like this is the interview, this was done, blah blah blah, and just have, because I think so. Here's my philosophy. I think that there's an ahistorical element to quilting happening right now because it's been so hyper capitalized, and there's such hyper consumerism that there's almost a split between like the history and those that are new to it or beginning. And so it seems like telling those stories would be really interesting because I hope lots of people listen, but I think the beginning quilter is one that, like, inviting them in to sort of the stories and the history would be really interesting, and have that as one of the things that we do. So I would love, because I love oral histories, and I also feel like as an oral, like when I was sitting there transcribing, I was like, who's going to listen? I'm the only one that's ever going to hear this great story. Like, you know, like I would, you know, with some person at UCLA or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would love to get those out to just listen to the story.
Man.
And then just say, like, if you want more of these, go to the join Quilt Alliance and be a member and all of that. But
that sounds great, Elizabeth.
I
feel like so fun. The sad part of that, you know, any archive that's not accessible is just all the inspiration that's locked down, you know, and that you could be, especially the voice, because I know that, you know, so much of how you respond to somebody's story is just multi-sensory, you know, and especially when you hear somebody's accent, or you hear their age, or you hear that the interview's being done and there's like a little dog you can hear on their lap, you know, and you'd always do that in the transcription where you say sound of dog chewing
that's right,
leg or something on there, but it's not the same as listening to it. So that sounds great.
I would love it.
We would love to do that.
That would be great.
And there's so many people too that we have like multiple interviews with. I find that also really interesting. Like somebody like Ricky Timms, who the first time he was interviewed, the person got his name wrong. He was like, "What is your name again?" You know, and now he's such an Uber star.
Right. Well, let's think about how to get how we do that, because we're going to try to start to go live in February, and I would love to have that as part of our, like, and we're going to have, you know, each week we'll do a special, or each 1 month, or whatever way you want to do it, a special sort of session from the Quilt Alliance.
That sounds fantastic.
I think it'd just be great. I really do. And it's not difficult for us to do any of that. So we can talk more about whatever we need to do in terms of the logistics of all of it. So
sounds good. I'll connect us with Emma, who could help sort of curate and provide audio.
And then on our side of it, my goal of the project is, we have a bigger project called the Role of Law and Creativity. So, you know, at the end of these interviews, I can tell what the role of law is by them talking, right? Like I can get what I need, but then I usually ask, like, do you have any copyright questions or issues or any of those things or patents or whatever? And so I would love to figure out what we do with these interviews, because again, I would like to deposit them somewhere. It's through Tulane University, so we can sort of figure out that kind of relationship, but they got to go somewhere, because if they just end up on my hard drive, they're not going to, we'll post them, but podcasts are very ephemeral. So, I would love to figure out a way to deposit them with you, or think through what that is, and what that would mean, because again, we're trying to do this very large project, and we'll have a lot of interviews and all kinds of people. I mean, every person, and they're really awesome.
That sounds fascinating. So
yeah.
quilts and copyright.
So
is the title?
So right now we call it JustWannaQuilt. That's our project. It's called JustWannaQuilt. And sort of it's why you quilt and how you started. But, we talk to Superior Threads and how that started. We do a lot of quilt entrepreneur stuff as well. So, there's so much entrepreneurial activity right now in quilting, and maybe always has been, but we're talking to a lot of those people as well. And we want to do more. So I think as we go, and then all the industry interviews that we want to focus on, like I want to do all of the batting companies. I want to interview all of them. So, just like one after the other, so we understand sort of who they are and how they're different and what's their philosophy and why they do what they do. So
that sounds so cool.
So so for us, for me it's the larger projects, the role of law and creativity. So the stencil company, we interviewed the stencil company, and their philosophy of intellectual property was fascinating, like what they thought was important to protect and what they didn't, and how important it was to their business. And it was surprising and really uplifting, actually, sort of their view of things. So that's what we're doing.
That sounds great. We're using, so we can talk about all the specifics of it at another time, but we're using a project or a software called Omeka. I think it's, I can't remember the name of the university that makes Omeka, but we're using that, and the University of Kentucky's OHM system for oral history management system, I think. So we can show you an example. I'll send you a link of what it looks like to see
awesome.
your view, because that would be what we want to use. And I think that's great. We have obviously have the same interest in getting to the story, and I find the industry stuff very interesting. There's a lot of family stories in that. A lot of family stories. There's a lot of understanding of the industry and history of the industry that's being lost. And there's this whole new thing of investment firms buying up
really interesting
companies, not just the first time, but then it changes hands from
so interesting
many investment companies. Then you find you get further and further away from the family and the history and the people that knew about what it was like when it was manufactured here. So.
Well, and I think on our side, I think what would be really great is thanks, I just got brought homemade jelly. One of our professors has a farm.
Oh, sweet.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
How awesome is that? Wild blackberry jam. How awesome. I love it. See, we're cool here.
Community.
Yeah. So the other thing was I would love on our side of it to help me think about who we should be interviewing. So right now it's kind of random, and we got some connections through market, but the second round, I think we want to be more deliberate and think through, what if we're trying to understand the industry, what are we trying to understand? Who are we trying to connect to? And I think maybe Quilt Alliance, having a relationship with Quilt Alliance would be very helpful in that. Because you guys are you've been, and it makes a little, people have been super wonderful, and we've gotten lots of really great people, but I think being more connected with you officially, unofficially or officially, would be super great. So I think, because I think they feel more comfortable with the fact that what we're trying to do is understand the industry and preserve what this is at this moment, because I see the transition. I see the 76 stuff, and I see those guys, the old timers, and I see the internet stuff, and I think it's a really interesting moment. People don't realize how young the quilting industry really is as an industry, and so that's kind of what we're trying to document, is what happened in this span of from 76 to 2020, what's going on here? And it's a huge transition.